Hello, I'm speaking. This is a test. If anyone is there, just tell me that you can hear me in the chat, please. Okay. Thank you. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the very first day of the Darwyn Danesh Memorial Flight stream. We're sitting here in beautiful Victoria Harbor. Just going to set the anchor on here, don't want to float away. Sorry if you hear my birds. They're quite chattery today. Here in the room with me, unfortunately, we don't have anywhere else to do this. Thank you very much, Unlikely Cat, for your comment. Have a wonderful flight. Thank you for joining us, and I hope that you enjoy, seeing Victoria Harbor with us here. So as you can see around here, we're in our beautiful DHC2 Beaver here, all specced out in a special livery just for Darwyn today, sporting the registration CF Dar, which is a little pet nickname that we used to call him, Dar. And we're in the cockpit now. Joining me today for this flight is my younger brother, Zachary Danesh, who really enjoys flying the Beaver. He's quite good at it, so he's going to be my co-pilot today. You may not be able to hear him, but he's in the shared cockpit with us, and he's helping me control things. So for now, we're just going to get things set up here. Our mixture set to full. Our prop is set to minimal here, and we're just going to go down here. We're going to be using the autopilot for this flight today, going over to Seattle, Tacoma. So there's going to be a bit of time sitting around. During that time, we can't hand fly it the whole time, but we're going to see how we go. We have a full tank of fuel in the front tank of the Beaver here, which should be more than enough to get us to Seattle if we manage our fuel well. And we're just going to get started now. Currently, where we are in Victoria Harbor, the METAR is all good for us, so we're just going to get our started right now. And with the, oh, all right, folks, so we're just getting set up to take off here. All our lights are on. We almost had a collision with that C-bus there that came out of nowhere from my end, but, whoop-de-doo. At least we didn't hit him, so we're all good. It should be quite a nice scenic takeoff out of Victoria. If you just look out the window here, you can actually see the BC legislature off in the distance, since Victoria is the capital, though it's not the biggest city in British Columbia. So we're just going to set our prop lever fully here, get the engine warmed up a bit, and I will get us taken off. All right, and with that, folks, we are now airborne. You can just get a nice view as we're turning out of the harbor here. Come along with us. We're just going to have the cruise ship dock right off to our left here as we exit the harbor. And you'll have James Bay and Oak Bay off to our left. And Victoria will take a look at them as we turn out towards Seattle. Got to turn left now towards the CVG waypoint for our flight. Climbing steadily, just about 500 feet per minute if we can manage that. And we are off to the races. All right, just going to start our left turn now. And there is beautiful James Bay off to our left. This road that's next to us that we'll be following is actually Dallas Road for those of you who know Victoria. So if you're ever taking a walk down there, because it's really quite a scenic place to be, just give us a shout since we're flying over now. As we're beginning our climb, I'm just going to set the autopilot on so I can start configuring the plane's power for climb a bit and get ourselves set up. Alright, as the trim is leveling out, we'll set ourselves to nav mode to get ourselves on the right track. Just gonna reduce our prop a bit here to about 2,000 for climb and keeping it 3,500 here. Now gonna go over Dallas Road. Beautiful sights. And if we look over here, there's the downtown Victoria area, just over there. And just below us is Beacon Hill Park, which is a beautiful place to visit if you're ever in Victoria. I really cannot recommend it enough. And with that, folks, we are now airborne, holding a pretty steady climb. Because of that, we're now going to retract our flaps to climb settings. And we're off to the races. As you can see, it should take us just about an hour to get to Seattle. So once we get to cruising altitude, we'll settle into a nice passenger view to see Washington State as it comes up. And we're now going to start turning over the Juan de Fuca Strait. Unlikely Cat, I agree with you, and I'm sure that my brother Zach does as well. It really is a beautiful plane. This aircraft was built by de Havilland Canada, which, as you probably guessed, is a subsidiary of the more infamous de Havilland brand of aircraft in the UK, which was famous really for building quite a lot of quite successful fighter and interceptor aircraft for the Brits during the Second World War. But de Havilland Canada focused on more civil applications. You might have seen the de Havilland Canada 6 Twin Otter here there. It's used quite a lot as a utility aircraft in all different parts of the world, Canada no least. Where we took off from, Victoria Harbour, is actually the home of Harbour Air, which is a small seaplane airline in BC, Canada, which takes you all over the province. And if you ever visit them, you're more than likely you're not going to be on a de Havilland Canada Otter or a de Havilland Canada Twin Otter, DHC-3 or 6 respectively. They do still have this type of aircraft, the DHC-2, on their roster, but it's quite old. It only got released in the late 40s, just after the Second World War had ended. So, even though it's considered a pretty antique aircraft at this point, it's one of the most rugged aircraft ever made. It's used for bush flying applications all over the world, and I think it's beloved by pilots everywhere. So, couldn't agree more that it's a beautiful plane, and I'm glad that you can enjoy it with us today. So as we continue, we're just about to reach 2,000 feet, making a nice, slow but steady climb here. We're now leaving the coastline of Victoria behind to head into the Juan de Fuca Strait. So as we look outside, actually, to our left, you might see this little bit of a mountain range through the clouds and mist over there, which is actually Olympic National Park in Washington State. If you've never been to Victoria before, you're actually able to see the United States just walking along the edge of the coast of the city right here. That's how close it is. So while we're technically still in Canadian airspace and waters right now, we're going to be in America in no time. So just stay tuned and we'll be in the US of A soon enough. It's just back in the cockpit here. We're now reaching 2,000 feet, so we're a third of the way up to our cruising altitude of 6,000. And we now have 54 minutes left. If you have any questions about Darwin or about the plane or about the places we're flying to, about what it's like to visit there, I haven't visited Seattle much recently, but I've been to Victoria quite a bit since that's where my family's from. So if you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the chat, and I'm happy to try and answer them to the best of my abilities. Yeah, sure. Like, I'm happy to do that. So you might have gleaned a bit of it from some of the promotional stuff I did on Instagram or on Reddit if you've come from there. But what this comes down to is my first cousin, Darwyn Danish, who, as I might have said, is from Victoria. He was sick. He passed away a couple of years ago during the height of the pandemic, not to COVID, thankfully, but he passed away from congenital heart failure at the age of 16, which is something that our family had somewhat expected. He had been born with this heart defect, and we were always told that he was going to die very young. But he kept on defying doctors. He kept getting older and older and older. We knew that he wouldn't be able to grow to full adulthood because his heart physically would not have been able to sustain a fully grown adult body. But when he did pass, it hit us all very hard because, as I might have said online here, he really was the life of the family. Because of his autism and his Down syndrome, he was really strict with routine. He loved his routines, but he wouldn't ever deviate from them. Is what kept him going throughout the day. And that routine involved reading his favorite book, Chicka Chicka 123. Involved eating his favorite food, which is chocolate ice cream. He could never get enough of it, and so chocolate ice cream is a family staple food now because of Darwyn. And just going and being with his friends, his caretakers, and getting regular visits from his grandma and grandpa. Darwyn wasn't necessarily the hugest fan of planes over anything else, but he loved big vehicles. He loved trucks and cars and planes and trains and automobiles and the whole thing. And so naturally, his favorite film franchise was Fast and Furious because a lot of big metal things going really fast. And he wasn't best at traveling because of his routines, but he loved going to places like Disneyland. Going on the rides gave him a thrill that he never got, before, and he just enjoyed the hell out of it. He wanted to do it all the time. He kept going back, and so Hawaii was some of his favorite destinations, but also means that they went to places like Los Angeles and San Diego and all over Canada, frankly, to visit family and to go to new places and do new things. So Darwyn was quite well traveled, despite any difficulties that may pose for him. And so the purpose of the flight is just to raise awareness about people like Darwyn, because there's lots of people with Down syndrome and autism and congenital heart failure and many other things that can pose a challenge to one's life when you don't get the support you need. And British Columbia isn't the biggest of places. It isn't the most well-funded of places. It has problems like everywhere else. And there are those out there with conditions like him that have some struggles. And so the purpose of this flight is firstly and foremost to bring awareness to Darwyn's life story and people like him, and just to keep him in our hearts and memories since the anniversary of his passing was in the past month. And to, if anyone ever felt like it, just to raise some money and awareness about the fund, because in a community as tight-knit as Victoria's, every little helps. But just being here with everyone who's viewing today really warms my heart. Thank you for being here just to memorialize Darwyn with us and to be on this flight where, for all intents and purposes, since it's virtual, he could very well be on this flight in spirit with us today. And I can see, unlike the cat, that you love Fast and Furious too. That that really helps to hear. So I'm glad you like it, because like I said, it really was his favorite. He absolutely loved that franchise to death. And Victoria, one of the best things to do this summer was to go to the cinema naturally, because it was air conditioned. And so what they would do is they'd buy the best seats in the house right in the center of the screen for him. And they would go watch Fast and Furious every time it came out. If there was ever a rerun of any of the movies in the franchise, they would go to see it as well, just because of how much he loved it. And, seeing it on the big screen for him, it was still a special experience. He loved it more than watching it at home, per se, which isn't the same. One of the funniest things is that because he was nonverbal autistic, he wasn't able to articulate his emotions or his thoughts the same way as most other people would. And so one thing he found about Fast and Furious was that, when there were lots of action sequences or the cars were crashing into each other or racing to get away from a car chase or what have you, he found it quite slapstick because, for him, all that kind of cartoon mania and action was quite funny. And so one of the things that would always happen is you get these very funny looks in the cinema because this in this movie, when something serious like an action sequence with her chase is happening, he'd find it funny and he'd start cracking up and laughing his arse off, which was one of the best experiences you could have if you ever went to the cinema with him, watching him laugh at Fast and Furious. It brought him the sort of joy that no one else in the cinema could have fathomed, I think. And that made Fast and Furious especially special with him. He loved everything like that. He also loved Mission Impossible quite a lot. That was one of the first movies I ever saw with him in the cinema, was Mission Impossible. And, they're, like I said, meant to be somewhat serious in that they're action movies. And seeing him laugh at them brought a whole new perspective to just going to the cinema and having the experience of these movies that I'd never really thought about before. So he opened my eyes up to a lot of things in terms of being a cinema goer as well, being someone who likes to watch movies. So if you're ever watching Fast and Furious anytime soon, Unlikely Cat, please do keep Darwyn in your thoughts, because I'm sure that he would love to watch it in spirit with you. Alright, folks, so as you can see, the plane just pitched down a bit as we're on autopilot. We are now reaching our cruising altitude, our top of climb, at 6,000 feet. So as we do that, we're going to start configuring the aircraft for a cruise flight, which effectively means we have to manage our RPM and our throttle and our mixture to make sure that we don't overstress the engine, we don't overheat it, we don't cause it to flame out, and we also have to retract our flaps to cruise, which I'm going to begin doing now. And what that does is, while it decreases our lift ever so slightly, that allows our speed and our momentum to take over and just power through the flight with a little less drag, which at higher altitudes is quite important. And as we reach this cruising altitude, we're going to hold our throttle just below 3,000 psi right here, as you can see, just around 29.5. And our RPM, we are going to reduce just a bit to 1,800 RPM, which is what the manual calls for to sustain flight, not knock the engine up and cause engine knocking, or to cause it to flame out. And so as we're doing that, because of the aerodynamics of the plane, because of its natural drag and flight profile, eventually with that power setting, the plane will just find its sweet spot in cruising speeds. If you actually look over here at our airspeed indicator, you can see, where's too much, where's too little. And so we'll find a nice spot in between 80 to 120, and that will be our cruising speed. And now, as you can see, the plane's leveled off, coming just up to 0 feet per minute, and we will have achieved our cruising altitude. With that, you can take a look outside. You can see it really is a beautiful day over Victoria. And you can look over there, that is where we departed from, just in the background, fair bits away. And we are now actually in American airspace. So up ahead of us, you can see some of the Juan de Fuca Islands on the American side. Just over here would be Whidbey Island, and that airfield is actually Whidbey Island Naval Air Station, which is one of the U.S. Navy's airfields up in the Pacific Northwest, one of the farthest north, discounting Alaska if we're talking just about the continental United States. And as I pointed out earlier, off to our right here is Olympic National Park. That's the trailing edge of it, where the park starts to go southwards, and you start entering over here this peninsula over over what becomes Seattle, we start going south. So often the distance just over there, underneath those clouds, will be the Everett area, which is famously the hometown of Boeing. That's where they have their main offices and manufacturing depots, and most notably Kilo Bravo Foxtrot India, which is their test flying field where a lot of new deliveries and test flights of aircraft to be delivered will be taking place. So if you're ever in Seattle and you want to spot Boeing testing out, a new 787 or 737 going to your airline of choice, that's where you're most likely to see it happening. So now that we are in that airspace, welcome to the US, and we're continuing south to Seattle, which should take us, according to our flight computer, just another half hour. So we're reaching our first waypoint, at which point we'll turn and follow it down to the Everett Field, BOR, and then we'll continue on to Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. So yeah, like a little geek, that is a very good question. So both in real life and in FS 2020, you'll notice that Beaver actually comes kitted out with different landing gear options depending on what the situation that aircraft might fly regularly and requires. The default setup will be a tail dragger setup where you have two larger wheels towards the front of the fuselage and then one little wheel at the back just under the tail assembly, which drags, hence the name tail dragger. On this aircraft, though, since we start in the water, we're using a pontoon setup, so we don't have any wheel at the back because it's kind of unnecessary. And you can actually see on the pontoons there is a built-in retractable gear system. So you have a front gear assembly on each pontoon, which acts as the steering mechanism, and then retracted into the pontoon itself. It's a much larger main gear assembly with two tires each, as you can see, which allows us to take off from water with these retracted since they don't impede any of the water flow over the pontoons and cause unnecessary drag. But then we can extend them using this gear lever in the cockpit just here, which means that we can take off from water and then land on land. What it also means is that for some airfields where there may be a water runway, but the airfield itself is a primarily land-based one, aircraft can start on land with their gears, use a ramp to slide into the water, and once buoyancy has taken effect, retract the gear and use the pontoon's rudders, which are actually controlled here, to steer the aircraft in the water, going from land to water, and then using power to shoot up that ramp after they've deployed the gear in the water, come onto their wheels, and then get onto dry land and start steering. So it's really nifty that you can take it anywhere, pretty much apart from the iciest of conditions, because there are some Beavers out there with special ice conditioned wheels that are meant to land in bush conditions up in Alaska, the Northwest Territories, or what have you. Just noting that we're now beginning our turn. We've reached our first waypoint. We're continuing to turn right now, taking us a bit more southwards. Eventually we'll go this way and then that way towards Seattle-Tacoma, which is down at the end of the peninsula over here. But yeah, to answer your questions, there's different wheel setups for different purposes, but in our purpose, yeah, you can have pontoons with retractable gears that allow you to deploy from land into water, from water to land, or vice versa, or without having to do either. It gives you more choice, it's more versatile, it makes the aircraft much more practical, in my experience, than having to use a tail dragger as well. Because even if you're not going to start from water or land in water or end up in water at any point of your flight, it just helps to have a non-tail dragging wheel setup for beginner pilots, just a bit easier to handle. Tail dragging is quite a skill in itself. You can ask any pilot, and I'm no expert on it, but for older pilots who have had the experience, especially flying aircraft before companies like Cessna and Sears came along making non-tail dragger cheap training aircraft and GA aircraft. Tail draggers were the primary method of getting aircraft in the air, partially because the tail dragger flight setup means that you start with your attitude quite high relative to your velocity, meaning that the way the wind would hit your wings when they're at that angle pushes a bit more lift under the wings, gets it airborne at lower speeds, which was quite important when you have less power in your engines, relative to the times. So, yeah, I hope that answers your question. But if you want a personal recommendation, I love using the Beaver with the pontoons rather than the tail drag setup. I think it's much funner, and I think it frankly looks cooler. So, yeah. That's a very good question, and the simple answer is that depending on what conditions you're using, if you're using IFR or VFR flying conditions, you could effectively fly what you'd call a point-to-point flight if you were on VFR and flying low from, during a relatively short distance. What we're doing right now is we're doing what you'd call VOR to VOR, which is where we're using a bunch of these VOR radio towers, which guide our GPS and radio navigation systems, to jump from one point to another. So we are effectively doing waypoint IFR flights. Though, as you can see, it could be VFR as well today, since it's very good flying conditions. There's not a lot of wind. In fact, where we're landing at Seattle Tacoma, there's only about 9 knots of wind, which isn't terrible. We should be able to pull off a fairly decent landing. And we're going to be actually turning around to land, so we're going to be passing by Seattle and then landing facing north on runway 34 base, not 16. So we're not just going to come straight in from here. But yeah, we are doing waypoints to waypoint flight for longer flights like these, especially since, as you can see, we have a Garmin 530 navigation system in this Beaver. So, folks, as we're continuing southwards, we have about 20 minutes or so left in this flight, if I have understood correctly. And we are now over the opening of this peninsula which Seattle resides in. We've passed by Whidbey Island and Friday Harbor and all the like, which is now all behind us, so we're well into the United States by now. We're coming up, like I said, with Everett and Lake Stevens on our left, if you're familiar with the Washington State area up around Seattle. And Everett, as I mentioned, is a prolific aircraft testing area. And so we're actually going to be passing fairly close to it, as you can see, since we're going over the PAE, the Everett waypoints, very soon enough, in let's say about the next 5 or 10 minutes. And if you look off in the distance, this is around the area that the airfield is located. So this is just north of the city of Seattle. Then we're going to be turning almost due south and continuing down, passing by Seattle, then turning around and landing on runway 34 right will be our approach. We're going to begin our top of descent about 5 minutes before we would have to be on final and on stabilized approach for landing, just to give you an update. All right, folks. So as we're continuing southwards, we are now going to be coming just over the Everett field that I mentioned earlier. So if we go outside and take a look, there is the airfield in question below. It's not the biggest, but it sometimes serves as an alternate for flights in and out of Seattle-Tacoma. So Payne Field is really quite the airport if you haven't seen it before. I like it quite a lot. The area is quite nice. It does serve the Seattle metropolitan area. It actually began with the Army Air Corps in 1941. So it's been in service since the Second World War. the Everett assembly plant for Boeing, as I mentioned, is there, and it was actually most famous for being the site of the first flights of the 747. So it's really quite a historic place if you like the history of Boeing or any other company like it. And obviously today, I mean, it seems to me to be quite beautiful from above. So as we're continuing south on Darwyn's journey with the memorial flight today, we are going to be saying hi to Boeing on his behalf as we fly over today. And as we come up on Payne Everett Field, our waypoint is actually located in terms of latitude and longitude just here. So soon our autopilot is going to initiate our turn right to the south, where we're going to be on our final leg down towards Seattle, Tacoma, which will be off in the distance, just around this way. So as you can see, we now have about 16 minutes left until we get to Seattle, at which point we're going to start slowing down during our descent. One of the reasons that the Beaver is actually such a preferred bush flying aircraft is because it has a very low takeoff and landing speed. So you can land on rocky areas and muddy areas or grass fields out in the middle of nowhere, not even fields really, just strips, without taking up a lot of distance at all for your takeoff and landing, which is useful when, out in nature you can't really determine the state of the runway you're going to be using, which is, again, one reason why Beaver is such a preferred bush aircraft. And again, at least to me, it really is a beautiful plane, especially in this nice bespoke livery all for Darwyn. So as you can see, we're beginning our turn now. So we're just going to bank right. And with this, we're on our final leg direct south to Seattle Tacoma International Airport. So as I said, our descent will begin in about 9-10 minutes. And we're making pretty good progress. We still got half a tank of fuel left. All is well. So as we continue the flight, for those of you who might know Seattle at all, if you've ever been there, off to our left is actually the Cottage Lake or Bothell area, and just off to our right here, just over here, is the Richmond Beach area. Both very nice neighborhoods of Seattle, and most importantly, off to our left over there, as you can see, is a little lake just off of the Sammamish area, and below us here, the much larger one is Lake Washington itself. So we're now entering the northern parts of suburban Seattle, and as you can see, we have just under 10 minutes left. So in 4 minutes, we're actually going to start our descent. So for those of you who are sticking with us to the landing, thank you very much for sticking through the full first leg of flight, and I hope that we can deliver a fairly smooth landing for you. And as we're actually approaching our top of descent, like I mentioned earlier, if you actually look off in the distance, that is in fact Seattle-Tacoma itself. So we're now in range of it, and we can see it visually, which is a good sign. We're going to be coming just off to what is the right downwind of our runway. So effectively, we're coming here, we're going this way, entering the right downwind, which means that we're going the opposite direction parallel to the runway that we're landing on. So if we're landing on 34 right, which is here, we're landing this way. We're going downwind to it on the right of it because the runway is this way, so we're looking at it south to north. Right downwind, turning onto base, which is perpendicular to it, right base, and then landing on 34 right. Fairly simple approach for our sake. Since we are in the area, one more tidbit for any Boeing fans out there who might watch this is you can see, so like you see, there's SeaTac here. There's also, you might have noticed, a little runway over here, which is actually Boeing King County Fields. This is another Boeing test airport, which can handle quite big aircraft. You can see the runway is fairly long, kind of similar to some of the ones we have at SeaTac. So if you are a Boeing fan, we passed over Payne Everett, and here we are doing another Boeing flyover for Darwyn's memory. Second one today. I think that's a pretty good record. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we are now beginning our descent into Seattle-Tacoma. So to configure our aircraft, we're going to put our prop forward, as the manual will tell us. We're going to reduce our throttle a bit, however, just to keep our speed in that nice area. We got to manage our throttle a bit. Also going to set our altimeter, which for Seattle Tacoma currently is 29906. So we go over here, just set it out there, 29906, and our aircraft is configured for the descent. Now we are currently flying at a heading of 167 degrees. So I'm just going to reconfigure our heading here. Since we've been on nav, the vibrations of the aircraft can actually move this around, so you have to manually configure it. Since we're going on 167, just going to try and get it nice there. There we go, 167. And with that, we can also now adjust our heading. We don't want to pass right over the field. Like I said, we want to get a bit of a downwind, so I'm actually going to set our heading for 160. There we go. That we're going to switch from nav to heading mode. So blowing fuel will just be below us to the right ever so slightly. And we're going to pass over, not pass over, but pass to the right of Seattle Tacoma Airport right there in front of us. Our descent so far is going quite well. As you can see, we're now coming up to 4,000 feet. And so hopefully by the time we're finished our descent, we'll be at just around 1,000, 1,500 feet actually. My mistake. We'll arrest our descent rate just a bit. Give ourselves some time to get a bit of a 3 nautical mile final or so. Don't want to be too low too quickly. Now that we have our altimeter set, though, we are pretty good to make some altitude judgments for our VFR landing. And of course, we're landing on runway 34 right, which you can see here. It's by far the longest runway at Seattle Tacoma, so hopefully we'll have lots of space to stop. There's a bit of sarcasm on my part. We'll have plenty of places to stop. As I might have mentioned earlier, this plane is famous for its STOL abilities. It really did not require much to get in the air in terms of speed or in terms of distance of its takeoff roll. As you can see, we're reaching our final descent points for final approach into Seattle-Tacoma, which is very convenient, just off to the right here. You can even see some of the aircraft parked at the gates, which is really quite cool. So we're just going to continue south a bit here. We're going to adjust to a heading of 165, just a bit so that we're lining up a bit more with the downwind of our runway now that we've gotten a bit of space for our base turn, which shouldn't be much in a plane like this, especially considering we have to do our decel. We're still at a fairly high speed for the sake of our approach purposes. So we're just going to continue down here, even though we've now reached 1,500, just to get a bit of space for us to do our base turn and then turn on to final runway 34 right. The other thing I'd just like to say to your viewers before we begin our base turn is just, I hope you can appreciate just how beautiful FS 2020 is. It's a really amazing simulator, given what you can see here. And so if any of you are into flight simulation or want to get into flight simulation, I can't recommend it enough. And this is coming from someone who started their flight sim career on X-Planes, so I've seen both sides of that coin. I messed around with PTD briefly as well. All great stims, but this really took the cake for me. And with that, I'm going to begin the decel just a bit, and I'm going to take manual control of the aircraft and begin our base turn. Just getting our flaps out. With that, the autopilot is disconnected. Starting my base turn. So as I said, you can see, considering we're not going very fast, we don't need a wide turning radius for our aircraft. Just continuing our base turn now. You can see Seattle-Tacoma off in the distance there. Just continuing now. Turn. There you go. You can see runway 34 right is right there in front of us. With that, our gears begin coming down. As you can see, that extends and then drops out, and our gears are down. Right, now we're going to start our turn onto final. Lower our flaps a bit more here. Just trying to catch this crosswind that we have to deal with on our way in. And here we go. We're now set on final. And I hope you'll apologize to your viewers if my approach isn't the best. It's been quite some time since I flew the Beaver. Haven't had a whole lot of practice recently, but I'm fairly used to doing quite steep approaches in it, given the places I fly. But I think we might just pull off a good landing here. I hope you can enjoy the sight of the trees too, because even though trees are not something you generally want to get too close to as a pilot, I can't help but be, taken away by the detail of them at this point in front of me. They add something to these final approach moments. So viewers, excuse me if it might get a bit bumpy here, but since we do have this crosswind to contend with, we might have to do a bit of crabbing here once we're down on the ground. Please bear with me. And with that, we are down. Now we're just going to get our landing and strobe lights turned off as we come off the runway. And I am going to direct us off to our right. We're also going to pull the prop just back to just below minimum. Since we no longer need all this power, we can give the engine a bit of time to rest. With that, we'll just taxi us off the runway. Also just going to track our flaps here. There we are, folks. Welcome to Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. I hope that you would consider that the same way I did, which is a successful first leg of the Darwyn Danesh Memorial flight. I think it was, at least. I mean, we got from point A to point B, and thank you very much, Like Little Geek, for your compliment. Thank you for saying great landing. I do appreciate it. I try my best, I do spend a lot more time in airliners on flight simulators, so hopefully that could be considered my forte. But I still hope I did a good job in the Beaver, because when it comes to light GA aircraft, this is my preferred one. That is for sure. So just going to continue taxiing. Once again, sorry for the birds. Now that we're down on the ground, I think it's fair to say they're pretty excited too. So we can see some parking spaces here. We're just going to turn into them. Usually these would be for much bigger aircraft, but today they can make do with us, I'm sure. And I hope you can enjoy. There's a nice DHT-4 Caribou off in the distance there. It's quite nice to see. It's another de Havilland Canada aircraft, which served in many different ways. It's again a very well-known, beloved cargo aircraft, and actually it served a lot in the Vietnam War with the United States Air Force and Army. So that's a bit of history for you. With that, we're just going to throttle down. Parking brake is on. And we're just going to kill that here. Beacon can come off. Cut off our fuel. Kill our magnetos. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, the first leg of the Darwyn Danesh Memorial flight is complete. We are here at Seattle-Tacoma after successfully coming from Victoria. And so now that we're here, we'd ask you to come back in an hour at 11 o'clock BST for the next leg of our flight, which takes us in an A320neo, so not this aircraft. We're going to be switching out to a new one, from Seattle-Tacoma to very sunny Honolulu, Hawaii, which is one of Darwyn's favorite places to visit throughout his lifetime. Thank you so much for joining us, and see you all in an hour.